the capacity it has for them. For the past several weeks, we have been looking at a series of sermons on In Search of Simplicity, because I find that in our life we oftentimes get quite cluttered and caught up with a whole lot of different things, and how do we arrange that, and how do we make things work for us? So, just by way of review, let me mention a few things. When we started out, Uwe Maurer actually started us out looking at a man by the name of Joshua, whom God had called and placed in a place of leadership. And the characteristic about Joshua is, even though he didn't know all the ins and outs, he just obeyed what God said to do. Really, Christianity, a Christian simplicity, is essentially the centrality of God in our lives and simply obeying Him. Very famous advertising slogan is, just do it. Just do it. So Christian simplicity is the centrality of God in our lives, which simply means we obey what He says. When we talk about this simple faith and practice of simplicity, what does that look like? And the thing is about, I intended this week actually to give you a long list of the books that I've been reading for your recommendation, and I will, but actually you could go on The City and find the same thing too. If you friend me on The City, you get to see it. So just an idea there. The thing is about simplicity, it frees us from an obsession to things and possessions and getting more. Simplicity frees us also from a feverish pace in life. And really, this was my primary motivation in wanting to preach this series of sermons, is because my experience is if you have kids, you're just flat busy. That's all. There's there's no other way around it. And when they're little kids, my daughter, my oldest daughter, has two little boys born very close together. And she wrote on her Facebook page to her parents saying, all night long, one goes to sleep, the other one wakes up, and so we play tag, my husband and I, talking about my son-in-law, taking care of the kids, and so we both wake up tired in the morning, and we're tired all day long. She says, now I really do appreciate what my parents went through when they were raising children. And I said, yes, glory to God. all that time looking at, you parents, you're so dumb. You don't know what's going on. Now it all comes home. And I just keep telling them, your day has come. Your day has come. And they're not even teenagers yet. So, but I just know that we have these really busy lives. There's a feverish pace in which we live life. And hopefully through this series, we'll understand that, we don't have to do everything. We really don't have to do everything. And there comes a certain wisdom and understanding what is it that doesn't need to be done, and that comes from being actually quite intentional. We'll look at that a little bit later. Simplicity also frees us to simply be who we are. The simplest thing to do is just to be who you are. And we don't have to try and figure out, well, okay, today I'm in church, and this is the way I am in church. Tomorrow I go off to work, and here's the way I am at work. Or we don't have to have a difference between our public life and our private life. What you see is what you get, and that's the simplicity of the matter. It's focusing in on who we are, being who we are, day in, day out, without trying to have any pretense, without trying to pretend, no duplicity, no trying to match my private life with my public life. It's one and the same. Living a life of simplicity is living a life that's counter to our culture. It's not the same as what this culture. Our culture trumpets living large, loud, and doing and having more, more, more. That's what our culture is about. And you just have to look at the advertisement to know that there's always something you just can't live without. Yeah. You know what it is for me? Should I be honest with you? The iPhone 6. This week, my wife's iPhone 4. Who has an iPhone 4? No. Am I being honest or confessing or what? So her iPhone 4 went on the blink, and I had it charged all night long and turned it on, nothing happened and so forth. I said, yes. She can have the 5 and I get the 6. But I thought, well, I better do due diligence, and I took it down to the Apple store, and he turned it on. It worked fine. I wish I could say, oh, thank you, Lord. The point is, though, you read the advertising. Maybe the best thing to do is not to read the advertising, and you look at the advertising, and you know what Apple wants to do? They want to convince you that you need to have that phone. So I'm learning that I don't have to listen to that. And freedom, the simplicity is realizing that this is the whole bent of our culture. Doing and having more, more, more. Simplicity just invites us to slow down, consume less, and enjoy more. So I'm getting to know my iPhone 5 even better and better. So from there, we then looked at Jesus and what Jesus has to say to us and some of the commands that he gave. And we looked, again, very simple. Jesus took all the laws, brought it down to one. Here's what he says. In Matthew chapter 22, verse 37, he says and following, and he said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And a second is like to it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. And on these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets. Jesus simplifies everything right down into there. So when we're looking for simplicity, we're looking at the Christianity and Christian simplicity. We go right here. And then he says, not only do I simplify these laws, but let me simplify the focus for you. Let me simplify where your attention should be. And here's what he says in Matthew chapter 6, verse 19 and following. Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth. That's completely counterculture. Where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And that's the key. Look at where we're spending our money. That tells you where our treasures are. Look at your calendar. Look at where your activities are. Look at where all your focus is and so forth. That will tell you where your treasure is. And that will then define where your heart is. The Bible is very clear. Where your treasure is, that's where your heart is. That's where the examination needs to take place. So the point is, in this exercise of simplicity is, how do we make room and how do we make time in our busy lives for treasuring God? For treasuring God. Our working definition of simplicity is this. Simplicity is clarity, purpose, and intentionality. It's marked by the intentional promotion of the things that we most value and the purposeful removal of everything that distracts us from it. So, if we're going to be, then, disciples of Jesus Christ, it should not be a complicated thing. He tells us, if we're to be a disciple of Jesus Christ, then we're to love the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, and mind. We're to love one another as we love him. And then we're also then to focus on, put our treasures on him. We're to treasure God. So what is it then? If I deeply in my soul really want to treasure God and treasure time with God, and somehow I just believe that a person who has become a believer, who's a disciple of Christ, who's been born again, whatever term you want to use there, I just believe that if the Spirit of God dwells within you, there is within our heart a desire to simply treasure God, to enjoy time with him, to want to be with him. But honestly, there's other things that crowd into our lives, and they're good things. They're not bad things. You know, we have a conscience and so forth, and we can be convicted about things that we know we're not supposed to be doing, but it's the good things that aren't the best. And so what we're wanting to do is to intentionally promote the centrality of Jesus Christ, to be like Jesus, to enjoy and treasure him, and to do that, to purposefully remove then what distracts and keeps us from it. So last week we mentioned then this matter of breaking cycles. And I told a bit about my trip to Nepal and to the Philippines, and the fact that we, even us today, we're not trying to break the cycle of poverty. as Jeff Long is trying to do in the Philippines. That's not our problem. But we're trying to break the cycle of materialism, consumerism. That is our problem. We're not trying to break the cycle of just, how should I say, being unproductive. Our problem is we have so much time. I mean, we have so many activities. We're caught up in this, and we're trying to see how we can break the cycle of being too busy, of doing good things, rather than being in the unhurried rhythms of doing what's best. So there's the cycle also that we have of entitlement. We get caught up in saying, you know what? I earned this. It's mine. It's for me. That's a cycle that definitely needs to be broken. We need to realize that God didn't just say, hey, you're better than everybody else, so I'm going to give you more than everybody else. God has given us what he has so that we might be able to give it to those who don't. We talked last week about the 80%. 80% of the world's population that lives on 300 NT a day. So I know we're not in that 80%. Fact is, probably we're in the upper 10%. Can't be for sure. But the fact is that we're so far, we're so much better off financially and with resources than probably about 90% of the world. Think about that for a moment. And so what do we do with it? And I'm not, please don't get me wrong here. I'm not trying to get us under some kind of guilty conscience and this conviction, oh, Pastor, you know, you want to get in my pocketbook. No, that's not my point. My point is we need to change our thinking from saying, I need more to, I have enough. And that's where we need to go. Because we get caught up in the cycle of, I need more, rather than saying, I have enough. So, it's my purpose that we might envision treasuring God. And as we envision treasuring God and being transformed into him, we might want to fill in the blanks here and say, I want more time to do what? I want more time to do what? And we might say, I would really like more time so I don't live such a rushed and harried and hectic life, that I can be more aware of not only what's going on around me, but I can be more aware of the presence of God within me. We get caught up in so much activity, we simply don't have time to rest and be quiet and listen to what God has to say and to be in his presence. So I want more time to just be with people, to be less worried about trying to get them to do these things so these programs can be a success. And by the way, Alex mentioned the Awana last night. Yeah, it was pretty chaotic. We had well over 60 kids and then a whole bunch of adults in here. But I'll tell you what was amazing. We had a boatload of 2s and 3s, I guess it was, puggles, and this was their first week. So obviously, the first time around, you're going to have one baby who cries. And the next one starts crying. It was funny because the parents are in here. So the baby cries and all the parents go, is that my baby? And I just said, hey, go check it out. You know, if you're worried, just get up and check it out. So all these parents got up and checked out. And then they all filed back in when they found that it wasn't theirs. But then after one started and the next one started, and so we had popcorn parents all night last night. It was funny to know how their parents' ears are tuned to that. But you know, it's really not about trying to get people to do what we want to do or to make programs successful. It's a matter of trying to be with people, to learn about people, to encourage one another. We might also say, you know, I want more time to volunteer for a cause or for a service, because I really sense that this is my passion. This is what God has put in my heart to do. And I believe with all my heart that when God created each one of us, and he says he created us in his image and he breathed into us, I believe that God has breathed into every single person in his creation a passion that he put there. I said this to someone not too long ago. I said, my heart's desire for you is that you could pursue your passion in your heart. Don't get caught up in a dead-end job or dead-end activity. What is it in your heart that it's calling to do? And so we might say then, I wish I had time to volunteer or to be a part of that cause, to really be involved. We might simply say, I'd really like to have more time just to get to know Jesus more. On the other hand, we might say too, I wish I had more money. You don't have to fill in the blanks. Everybody can say, I wish I had more money. I mean, really? Don't look at me like that. You've never said that? I wish I had more money to help the poor and the homeless. I wish I had more money or resources to break the cycle that they're in, to change their life so it doesn't go on and on and on. And in November, I'm hoping that Jeff Long can be over here from Kids International Ministries, because that's what he's doing. He's breaking cycles. He's breaking cycles of poverty, and he's breaking cycles of ignorance so that people know better what to do, so it just doesn't go on in the same way all the time. We might say, I wish I had more money to make an extended missions trip. Or where I could go, I would like to have enough money and resources to where I could go and I could live in a community, and just by being there and working in that community and changing the neighbors and who change the neighbors to change a community. I'd love to be able to do that. But you have to have a job, right? I read a story about a couple who, when they got married, they had a very long discussion about what they were going to do with their finances. And they decided that they wanted to come to a point in their life where they were not dependent upon full-time work necessarily. And so they made a plan to live very frugally early on in their marriage, to be able to put away funds to make proper investments and so forth, so that they could do exactly this. And even before the kids were out of school, they packed up their home and their family and went to another country and embedded themselves and just began to work. You know something? I really believe that's something that something like that is exactly what the country of Nepal needs, where people would just go there who would say, I would like to be Jesus to you. I would like to show you how Jesus would like to make to be involved in this community, changing this community, and to just be Jesus to a people group for maybe a year or two or even longer. And we might also say, I wish I had money to be debt-free. To be debt-free. Why do I say that? Because I have put 6 kids through college. Actually, 5. I got 1 more to go. And yes, I would love to be debt-free. It's going to be a few years. But again, it's a matter of being intentional about it. It's a matter of saying, if this is going to take place, then there's certain things that have to be done. And this is the thing, is that even with our spirituality, and even with this idea of simplifying life, I promise you, it's not going to happen automatically. What does? What just happens automatically? I'll tell you, trouble. You don't have to intentionally get in trouble. You just get in trouble. So, but if we want to make changes in our life, you just have to decide how it's going to happen. And I want to make some suggestions for that today, because my experience is this, that when we really want to do something, or we really want to acquire something, we will make it happen. We'll make it happen. You know why? Because that's where our focus is, and that's where our attention is. We really want this bad, we'll make it happen. Most people manage to do what they really want to do, or to get what they really want to get. No amens on that? Not because you necessarily have to have it. It's just something you really want. We can make it happen. If you really want to have money to do missions or be on mission for Jesus Christ, you know what? You can make it happen. If you really want to serve and volunteer for a something that you have a passion for, you can make it happen. It can be done. Don't just look at life and say, I'm caught in the cycle. And that's what happens. We do get caught in these cycles. It just goes on and on and on. Unless we make a break, it will always be that way. That's why we need to break cycles. And in breaking cycles, we then need to put on a what I would rather call than a cycle, called the unhurried rhythms of life. We'll talk about that. So I'd like for you to turn your Bibles to Ephesians chapter 4. And in the Ephesians chapter 4, we'll read from verses 17 to 24 here. The main part of the passage comes in the second half, and we'll show that to you. It says, Ephesians chapter 4, beginning with verse 17. Now this I say and testify in the Lord, that you must no longer walk as the Gentiles do, in the futility of their minds. They are darkened in their understanding, alienated from their life of God because of the ignorance that is in them, due to their hardness of heart. So it's just being stubborn there. They've become callous and have given themselves up to sensuality, greedy to practice every kind of impurity. Now notice verse 20. But that is not what you've learned, the way you learned Christ. That is not the way you learned Christ. Assuming that you have heard about him and were taught in him, as the truth is in Jesus. To put off your old self, which belongs to your former manner of life and is corrupt through deceitful desires, and to be renewed in the spirit of your mind. Put on the new self, created after the likeness of God in true righteousness and holiness. Well, let's just take a look at that for just a moment. Notice it says, the way you learn Christ. The way you learn Christ. May I say to you again, folks, this matter of being a Christian, you just don't suddenly be a Christian. I understand the salvation issue. I understand the being born again. I understand the change that takes place at the cross and so forth. But when Jesus, and this is a term that Jesus used, that Jesus coined when he was talking about this conversion thing, he says, born again. Well, you understand that when a person is born, that's not the end of the story now, is it? Thankfully. There's a growth that takes place. There's a maturing that takes place. And you also know that with that, if you've had children at all, that with that growth and maturing, there's certain training that needs to be done, teaching. That's why he says in verse 20, it says, 21, assuming that you have heard about him and were taught in him. That word taught also has the word of the meaning of disciplining and learning these practices. And so it's sometimes frustrating to me because I meet Christians who are just wondering, oh, it's not working out for me. Well, what do you mean it's not working out for me? You know, because so many folks have this idea, okay, well, now I'm a Christian. Now it's all in God's hand, you know. Yes, I understand. The work of the cross and conversion is totally up to Jesus Christ. Totally up to Jesus Christ. But then we don't go lie down in a hole someplace and expect the rest of it to take place, do we? We have to live this life. We have to make choices. We have to do some training. We have to do some learning. That's why we do these things. And so it's a matter of establishing these rhythms and so forth, just like we were learning about in the book of Leviticus. When the children of Israel came out of Egypt, they had been for 400 years living in Egypt. They had developed the practices and the rhythms and the cycles that came from living in Egypt. When they came out of Egypt then, the first place they went to was Mount Sinai, where God gave them the law. What is the law? We tend to think of the law in such horrible terms, but really God was just telling them, hey, listen, this is a new way of living now. Let me tell you then how you should live. And the whole practices of the sacrifices that they went through, it was God saying, this is the way that you need to learn to live so that we can live together. If you want to live in God's presence, there's certain things you need to know about me, and God was teaching his people and developing in them these cycles, these rhythms that they went through in their daily worship, their periodic ceremonies and so forth, so they then could begin to focus and their mind upon God. And it's the same thing for us today. Now, it's not in a legalistic way. I don't want you to think that, hey, if I do all this, it's not what we do. We do these things in order to be the person we want to be. So, I don't know how to play the piano. I wish I knew how to play the piano. You know why I'm never going to learn to play the piano? Because I don't make the effort to do what needs to be done to learn how to play the piano. It's that simple. It's that simple. Now, is playing the piano simple? I don't think so. You can take years of music theory, still not play the piano, but have all the theory. It just is a matter of you've got to learn the chords and all that kind of stuff. And what am I talking about? I don't even know how to do it. Yeah, let's talk about football or soccer, shall we? Then I can tell you about that. Trying to get off that theme for a while. But that's the whole point. And that's why we're looking at this here, is because in this passage of Scripture, he says to us in verse 22, you have to put off the old self, put off the old ways, put off the old cycles, put off the old ways of doing things, he says, which belongs to your former manner of life. I mean, that's how we live. We didn't know any better. And it's corrupt because of deceitful desires. That comes from the heart. Have the wrong desires. Then he says in verse 23, be renewed in the spirit of your minds. This is what Paul talks about in Romans on several occasions. We have in our minds, we make these decisions to do these certain things. And you don't, and again, go back to this, you don't really have to love the piano to learn how to play it. You really don't. You can just learn how to play it because you make yourself do it. But he's saying here that be renewed by the spirit of your minds, in so doing, and if I were to try and play, I would be so frustrated. But I see somebody who has spent years and years and years practicing. My neighbor where I live, right across the space between buildings, practices, I don't know if it's a he or she, but they practice their violin every weekend for hours. I mean, literally 8 hours a day they'll practice that violin. It's beautiful. But I also notice that in practicing the violin, they also go back to basics, just basics. And so these are some basic things of putting off the old life, putting on the new, the spirit of the night, of your minds, putting on the new self, created after the likeness of God. And here it is. This is treasuring God, the true righteousness and holiness. This it be the desire of our heart. So let me just give you some practical matters with regard to doing that. Okay, this is just nuts and bolts kinds of things. The first thing is this: we need to learn to live light in a land of plenty. Learn to live light in a land of plenty. And I give you this verse, 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 8. And God is able to make all grace abound toward you, so that having all sufficiency in all things at all times, you may abound in every good work. This is my favorite verse in the Bible because it includes everything. There's nothing that's left out, okay? Begins with God, all right? God's able to make all grace. He's not stingy about it. He says it's all grace to abound to you, that you having all sufficiency, everything's there, in all things, at all times, that you may abound in every good work. I mean, that's a great promise, folks. What's missing there? I can't find anything missing there. And so when we look at this life, we need to learn to live light, because it doesn't depend on us having to come up with everything all the time to get the job done. It has this idea then is learning to live light in this land of plenty is to be able to rest on God that He will provide. So there is the necessity to practice frugality. Frugality is a discipline of simplicity in which we limit the possessions we choose to own or acquire. We don't have to have everything. We don't have to own everything. It's okay for us to say, no, I don't need it. So, in the interest of being fair, I really don't need an iPhone 6 right now. I'll wait till the next generation. Anyway. But I use that example because it's such a clear example. Apple's a smashing success. One of the reasons why they're a smashing success is because they do put out good product, but they're also able to convince the people who had the old product they need the new one. I have friends that are that way, man. In fact, the MacBook Air that I have is from somebody who says, oh, the new one's out. And I said, fine, I'll take the old one. I bought one for my wife the same way. I got a great discount because somebody says, I need the new one. I said, fine, I'll take the old one. Just with phones, it's different. You know? So the practice of frugality, though, it's a simplicity where we decide, I don't have to have everything. And if we need an example, we need look no further than Jesus. Jesus knew and practiced the discipline of limiting himself. He'd never even had a bed to sleep on. That's a little extreme, wouldn't you think? He didn't have a home that was his own, didn't have his own room or his own bedroom to go to. He knew and practiced because Jesus limited himself to being a human. to living within the shell of a body. Jesus limited himself even with his ability to know things. He said, the time is in my Father's hands. When he's ready, he'll reveal it. Jesus didn't know everything. He chose to limit himself to human likeness so then he then could offer the ultimate gift of love, his own life. His life. Frugality is this discipline of simplicity. Then it teaches us to refrain from owning things we don't need or using money simply to satisfy our desires. Now, I want to caution us on this, and again, I don't have time to go into all the ins and outs of all this thing. I do just want to make this caution. When I talk about frugality, sometimes we're thinking, well, less is always best. Less is not always best. Because sometimes, it's probably not so much the case here, but a family needs 2 cars. And we might say, well, you're not being very frugal. You could probably get by on one, but sometimes it can't be done. I mean, part of the family heads off that way in the morning, part of the family heads off on that way in the morning. And if you have one car, it just is extremely difficult. Sometimes it's necessary. So the point is not to make life miserable. The point is simply to say, how can we intentionally find places then where we want to make more of our resources available to others? So the essential character of frugality is actually fruitfulness and joyfulness. Remember last week we talked in 1 Timothy chapter 6 about contentment? Contentment. And he says, having food and clothing, therewith be content. Now wait a minute. Wait a minute. Are we going to be content just because we have food and clothing? No. You know how it is. I need a flat screen, right? That's not really clothing, but maybe God can understand that that's where contentment comes. And that's the whole issue, folks, is that we need, if we can learn to be content with simply having food and clothing, it would open up resources for us. I'm not saying you can't have a flat TV. I'm simply saying this. We need to change our thinking from not so much what we have to have to what can I free up then to be used in God's kingdom. The question we need to ask ourselves is, how much is enough? Do our possessions weigh us down? Do our possessions distract us? Do they cause us distress? Do they cause our blood pressure to go up because we have so much stuff? Then it's just simply time to say, we need to get rid of it. We need to get rid of these distractions and so forth and live on a different level. Not only do we need to practice frugality, but there's another point to be made: to live a generous life, not a grasping life. The joke about missionaries is this. Because, as a missionary, I have to go from church to church. I raise money for our missions work and funds and so forth. And so for a year and a half, that's what I did. Went to 180-some churches and said, hi, my name is David Homer. I'd like you to support me. How much can you help? So this is the missionary handshake. And the joke is about Christians is that, not Christians, but the missionaries, is that they've always got their hand out for something. I also learned this lesson. Some of you who are Cantonese will probably know this. When I went to visit families in Hong Kong, usually would try and take a gift. Well, I thought it was interesting. Whenever we went to the fruit store to get a gift to take to these families, then they always got these big golden oranges, because the word for orange in Cantonese is similar to the word for gold in Cantonese. And so it's figuratively speaking. But I saw a nice bunch of bananas. And I said, well, let's take bananas this time. And he said, no. Because bananas look like you've got your hands out like this. Yeah. And he says that would be the wrong meaning entirely. So I thought that was just really interesting. But that's kind of what the idea is, living generously, not living with a grasping life that I need it. It's me. So it means then looking at our life and saying what kind of consumption is frivolous and so forth and unnecessary, because frivolous consumption will corrupt the soul. And consumerism, which is a major problem in our upper 20%, especially the 10%, consumerism is an attachment to materialistic values. And again, Listen, I was honest with you, okay? I've been very honest with you about the whole iPhone 6 thing, all right? But I know enough that each one of us has this thing, there's something I really want. It's very rare that you find that somebody says, no, I'm fine. Don't need any. Self-indulgence damages our character. It trains us to not be satisfied unless we get what we want. How much effort do you put into training your children saying, you don't always get what you want? But listen, Mom and Dad, don't you get what you want? You know why? Because you can make it happen. Kids can't make it happen unless you make it happen for them. So we can teach our children, you know what, you'll be better off if you don't always get what you want. We need to teach that same truth to ourselves. Because when we have this idea that we're only satisfied when we get what we want, that lays the groundwork for greed. For greed. Let me just give you a simple analogy of what greed looks like on a global scale in this world. So let's imagine that we're sitting at a round table that has 5 dishes. And this round table then, with its 5 dishes and 5 people around it, 4 of the dishes are owned by one person. You and the other 3, you get the 1 plate. So here we are sitting across the table from the one person who owns the 4 plates. What are you thinking? Thinking, dude, pony up, man. There's 4 of us on this 1 plate here. What are you holding on to the 4 plates? But you see, that's the way things are distributed in this world. And again, all I'm simply saying to you is this. Let's change our thinking a bit. Let's change our thinking and not thinking that we deserve all that we have. We have what we have so that we have the ability then to be able to share with others. This illustrates why so many people in the world simply lack food or shelter, while a few of us, we live actually in pretty good luxury. We really do live well. Practicing frugality helps to bring clarity. It's a matter of distinguishing then between what are necessities and what are luxuries. You know, I really sense that I'm kind of stepping on some people. Please don't get me wrong in this, okay? I am stepping on toes. I intend to do so because if you travel into other third world countries, man, it breaks your heart to see the complete poverty that people live in. And it also breaks your heart when you go to countries that are very well off and they have the attitude, it's mine and I need more and it's all about me. And it's in this very area that we Christians who call ourselves disciples of Jesus Christ, it's in this very area that we must then take a good look at ourselves and say, am I then truly a follower and a practice of what Jesus does? So practicing frugality brings clarity. It's intentionally limiting our spending and managing our resources. Why? That we might be able to help others. We might be able to help others. The second thing I like for us to look at is the intentional, unhurried life. Intentional, unhurried life. How many of you would wish that life would just slow down? That it wouldn't be just one thing after another, day after day after day. Proverbs chapter 21. This is Solomon's wisdom. Solomon in all his wisdom had this to say about plans and time. He says, the plans of the diligent lead surely to abundance, but everyone who is hasty comes only to poverty. Not necessarily talking about a poverty of wealth and riches, but a poverty of life, an emptiness of life, because we're just so caught up with so much. The goal of our society is this, and check it out. We are impressed with how much people can pack into one day, right? We look at their calendar, wow, man, you're a busy person. And people this is a side note. People always come to me and say, Pastor, I didn't call you up because I thought you were so busy. it is my business. I mean, that's what I'm supposed to do, and so forth. But if I'm too busy to take a phone call, I am way too busy. If I'm too busy to visit with people, then I'm way too busy. And so we are impressed by those people who can pack so much into one day, they don't have time for other things, and somehow we have this idea that quantity equates with equality, or quantity equates with quality. But simplicity with time requires the diligent intentionality of creating enough space that I can at least say yes to God about treasuring Him and loving people. I can say yes to God about treasuring Him and loving people. Our busyness and our hectic life keeps us from things that we really value, we really wish that we had more time for. So, here's a suggestion: making space. Making space. How do we make space? The divine rhythm that's given to us is called Sabbath, the Sabbath rest. And I don't offer this to you as a law, although it is a law, and although it is a practice that we should be practicing, the Sabbath rest. It doesn't necessarily have to be on Sunday, and it doesn't have to be practiced in exactly a certain way, because that's what Jesus said to the religious leaders. Hey, back off. Because the Sabbath was made for the people, not the people for the Sabbath. And that's in Mark, actually, Mark chapter 2, verse 27. It's a day of the week which is tailored for us to renew ourselves internally in all aspects of life, the Sabbath day. It's a built-in rhythm that we need to practice in our life. It's building spaces. Another way of building spaces is making margins. What are margins? Margins are pauses of unscheduled time. And in the people who teach about time management, give every minute a job, is what they'll say. This is also the mantra for those who teach you about budgets and how to spend your money. Give every dollar a job. I mean, the job may be sitting in the bank and being savings, or the job may be something, or the same with the time. Give every minute a job. But my suggestion is you should give some minutes the job of just simply being a space. I didn't know this, so maybe you do. But software developers, when they're writing software, I was told, they will leave spaces of white space, so it's easier then to read the program. And may I say to you, that's a very good suggestion. That in our lives, we should leave some white spaces so that we can see some definition of what it is we're about. And planning white spaces. Look at your calendar. Some of you may have a calendar you put up on a wall. And maybe it looks very impressive that every single day is filled in with multicolors of all the stuff that you've got to do. And there's no white spaces. What we need to do is to create these spaces, these margins. Pauses and margins create a stillness inside of us. And that also has to do with making wise choices. Making wise choices. Here's a suggestion. List everything you do for 1 month. I mean, it might be 10 pages long, but list everything you do for 1 month. Then go back through that schedule and list everything then according to a ranking. And rank them according to what is essential and according to what is important but not essential, what is helpful but not necessary, and then everything else. Then, once you have your list of essential, important, helpful, and other, ruthlessly eliminate all of the last two categories, helpful but not necessary, and all the others. And this particular person suggests then take 20% of the first two and get rid of them too. Most of us could probably do that and find an enormous relief and not miss out too much on life. Unless, of course, you have kids. And I say that because they fill in all the spaces as hard as you try to make the white spaces. So, another suggestion then for living an intentional and unhurried life is serving from the deepest place. And this is really important to me. This is kind of this would be a passion for me for you. And that is this, that you are doing what you really love to do. And one of the reasons why people don't is because they haven't taken the time to stop and to think, what is it? What's the passion in my heart? What is it that I thrive to do? And it may not be something you get to do every day, or for me, I get to stand up here and I get to preach on Sundays and Saturdays and so forth. And I enjoy being a pastor most of the time. I'd say maybe 95, maybe 85% of the time I enjoy being a pastor. And but you know, could I do something else? Yes, I think I could do something else. I used to do other things. I love what I'm doing. I love it. And I want you to be doing what you're loving. It's especially true when it comes to ministries and being a ministry team leader. I rarely ever go to somebody and say, you know, you need to do this. Because it means so much more when somebody says, excuse me, Pastor, I see you have the need in this church here. I would love to do that. Would you let me do that, please? In fact, I'll pay you to let me do that. You know, somebody who comes and says, I've got a passion to teach children. I love children. And I want so much to be involved in that, and they'll step up for it. This is what I desire for everyone. And maybe it's not within this place here, but maybe you've got a passion in your working place to help someone, to encourage someone. Maybe you have a passion to help out poor people or homeless people. Whatever it is, and God gives that to us. It's a God-given passion that fits our heart, fits our work, fits who we are. And this is where we need to be serving from, this deepest place. There's a lot of needs that tug at us. There's a lot of things that say, you need to do this, you need to do that. But how do I decide where to make my commitments? I think it's especially important, folks, and one of the difficulties with Christian workers is this. We feel like we have this obligation to say yes to everything. Oh, well, that's a nice thing to do, Pastor. You should do this. Who's got recommendations for the pastor? Pastor, you should do this. You should do that. And I go, that's a great idea. But I can do best what I do best. And somebody has a passion for exactly what you're talking about, they'll step up for it. So to simplify things is to look within us and to see, where is it that God's leading me? Where is it that God's directing me? Where is my desire? Because when you're serving in your area of gifting and passion, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a volunteer type thing. Maybe the job that you're paid to do is the job that you're going, this is what God made me to do. This is what God made me for. I love this. And boy, when you get paid to do it, I mean, come on, that's icing on the cake, right? I get paid to do this? Are you kidding me? I do it for nothing. Don't get any ideas here. I still got to put food on the table. So, but the thing is that it's that idea, and I've heard Dan Long say many times about his job at TAS. He's got a patsy job, come on. And he'll tell you that. He'll tell you that. He said, I get paid to do what I love to do. That, to me, is one of the most thrilling things for a person to say. I love what I'm doing. And God has given each one of us this. And part of the frustrations that we face in life is that we're spending so much time and so much effort to try and do what we really don't like doing. And again, it's a matter of stepping back and saying, where is that? Maybe talking to friends, maybe talking to husband and wife, talking it over. So what tugs deeply at my heart? What is that deep passion in my heart in serving others? So those are some things to consider. Living light in a land of plenty and living an unintentional and unhurried life. I know everyone wishes that was true. The fact is, we take what we call vacations. Some of the vacations are the most exhausting stories I've ever heard. The best vacation that I can ever think of is where there's absolutely no attractions, nothing to go see, nothing, but just nothing. It's an amazingly refreshing thing. But then if you have kids, I understand. So I'm going to have to preach another series on sermons for parents. But anyway. So let me just give you some things to think about. Suggestions to help simplify. And one of the suggestions would be to start 2 lists. Just start 2 lists. One list is, you would say this, I want to serve others as Jesus would. How can I limit my spending by living with less? Just ask the question, how can I limit my spending by living with less? In cutting out things that you don't have to have, you don't have to own. And it's not saying, okay, now I'm going to go live like a pauper in a thatched hut, so I can say that's not the point. But I'm confident that every single one of us, whatever our economic strata is, that there are things that we can find, that we can live without, in order that we might be then helpful in helping others who need so much more than we do. So just make a list of those things that you can limit your spending on so that you can live with less. Second list is this, and we talked about this. I wish I had more time to make that list. I wish I had more time to hang out with some people. I wish I had more time to be involved in a charity and to volunteer my time and so forth. I wish I had more time. Whatever it is. And, you know, the thing is this. Even, and I'm joking about the kids, but I want to encourage you as families, if you say, you know, I wish I had more time to be involved in mission. Where's something you can take your family? Well, you could take your family to the Philippines and help out there. I know several families have, and they've got tremendous stories about what is done for them as a family as they've gone to places like that. You can also be involved in taking your family on a mission to go and visit tribal missions and help out the tribal people here. There's these opportunities too, and this is a family activity that could be done. I wish I had more time to, and then just write down on this list. And as you do, write down these things. And if I did, what would the next step be? So write down what you would like to do if you had more time, and beside that, write down what would be the next step. The reason I say that is because I know of people who have all their life said, you know, I wish that I had done this. But the reason they never did is they never wrote down what's the next step. And they never took the next step. So if we'll write down the next step, then it'll help us then to get moving in that direction. Another suggestion would be to start with small intentional decisions regarding your time. Be intentional about your time. Listen, we all have the same amount. And whether you like it or not, and whether you believe it or not, I should say, you are the master of your time. You say, well, I got a boss. Yes, you do. You do have a boss. But you also have to come to the point to where does the boss run your life and you run your life. And sometimes it's a tough decision to make. A good boss will work with his employees to be sure that they're fulfilled because they're much more productive. Start with small intentional decisions regarding your time. What do you really want to do? How can you be more effective in the work that God's given you? This is your passion. What is it that you can do to be more effective at it? And then consider then for yourselves what the Sabbath looks like for you. What would a Sabbath time look like? I would suggest there's some books out on the Sabbath too. The Mudhouse Sabbath is a very good book written by a lady who was struggling with some of these issues and how she incorporated the Sabbath into her life and the huge change that it made for her. Consider what the Sabbath looks like for you. And if you were to begin right now today, how would you do it? What would you do? Then a very important suggestion is just this. Pray. Pray. By that I simply mean saying, ask God. Is God alive? Does he reveal himself to us? Is he just kind of like the guy in the sky, you know? I mean, the good old boy upstairs or something like that? He's God. He's vitally concerned about each one of us. It would be a good idea to take some time. Make some time. Don't take it, just make it. And then take the time to sit down quietly and ask God, either sitting in front of your list before the Word of God, and say, God, where do we begin on this? How do we simplify things so that we can be focused on you and treasuring you? And then I just want to leave you with this last bit of advice. Because here's the thing that happens too often with this, is we take these disciplines, and even the things that we mentioned here, and we make them into legislative rules so that you don't do this, that you're not right with God. These are simply tools. They're just tools. They're tools that will lead us and open us up then to being changed by God, to being moved by God, to treasure Him. So don't emphasize the discipline or the practice. Remember, your intent is to truly treasure God. So this last comment here, the purpose of simplicity is making space among our possessions and our time to truly treasure God. And that's the crux of the whole discussion for the last however many weeks. The purpose of simplicity is how do we make space in our possessions, in our time, to truly treasure God? Because I just know that in our heart there's this desire. But it's how do we take that next step and to make that space, to see these desires bloom and blossom, and to where we're in fellowship and in communion with God. And I know it's hard to do. I know it's hard to do. But it's so very rewarding. I've never met anybody who says, I wasted too much time spending it with God. Never have met that kind of person. So, make space in time and possessions. Heavenly Father, again, as we come to the close then of this time of talking about in search of simplicity, I truly desire that we have found it. We found it in the simplicity of Jesus Christ, the centrality of Jesus to our life. That we would see, Lord, in your word, the simplicity of loving God with all of our heart, soul, and mind, letting God be our treasure, and making our life to rotate around that treasure. Father, just taking the time that we need to do that, making the space. Let our treasures, the desires of our heart reflect in our treasure. God, it's not an easy thing to do. I don't expect that all of a sudden everybody's going to nail it on the head. But Father, help us to take that first step. Just to examine our hearts. Do I truly treasure time with God? Treasure God and desire you above all else. Let that be our question. And let us mold our life around it. I ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. And so we complete this series.